Mia Chen had always dreamed of studying abroad, but nothing could have fully prepared her for the moment she stepped off the plane at Edinburgh Airport on a cold, gray September morning. The rain was steady, and the wind cut through her light jacket like a blade. At 21 years old, Mia was a third-year English literature student from Taipei, Taiwan. Hard-working, curious, and quietly determined. But standing alone in the arrivals hall, surrounded by rushing strangers and a language she had studied for years, yet somehow couldn't quite catch in its spoken Scottish form, she felt very small indeed. She collected her 2 heavy suitcases and made her way to the bus stop, following the directions she had printed out the night before in her bedroom back home. The bus journey to the University of Edinburgh campus was longer than she had expected. Mia sat by the window, pressing her nose gently against the cold glass as the city rolled past her. Ancient stone buildings, narrow cobbled streets, and hills draped in a soft autumn mist. It was beautiful and strange all at once. At one point, she nearly panicked when she thought she had missed her stop. The street names were unfamiliar, and the bus driver's announcement came too quickly for her ears to follow. She scrambled to check her phone, heart racing, before confirming she still had 3 stops to go. She exhaled slowly and reminded herself to breathe. She was here. She had made it this far, and that was already something to be proud of. Her dormitory room was small, almost surprisingly so. A single bed pushed against the wall, a narrow wooden desk, a tiny wardrobe, and one window that looked out onto a gray courtyard. Mia set her suitcases down and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time since arriving, she felt the full weight of homesickness settle over her like a heavy blanket. She missed the noise of Taipei, the smell of night market food, her mother's voice calling her for dinner. She unpacked slowly, placing a photograph of her family on the desk, then reached for her phone and called home. Her mother answered immediately, as if she had been waiting. "Be brave, Mia," her mother said softly. "This is your adventure." Mia had barely finished the call when she heard a gentle knock at her door. She opened it to find a young woman with a bright, warm smile and a steaming mug of tea in each hand. "Hi, I'm Priya. I'm in the room next door. I made extra tea. I always make extra tea when I'm nervous," she said, laughing a little. Priya was from Mumbai, India, and had arrived just the day before. She was outgoing and full of energy, and she spoke with such easy confidence that Mia felt herself relaxing almost immediately. They sat on the floor of Mia's room, sipping tea and talking about everything: their universities back home, their families, their fears about the coming semester. By the time the mugs were empty, Mia no longer felt quite so alone. The first week passed in a blur of orientation events, campus maps, and trying to remember which building held which department. But it was the first day of lectures that truly tested Mia's confidence. Her Scottish literature course was taught by Professor Donaldson, a tall, white-haired man with a warm expression and a Scottish accent so thick and musical that Mia could barely follow a single sentence. She sat in the middle of the lecture hall, her notebook open, her pen ready, but her mind struggling to keep up. Keywords slipped past her before she could catch them. She looked around and saw other students writing busily, apparently understanding everything. Her face grew hot with embarrassment, but she said nothing. She simply wrote down what she could and hoped she had not missed anything too important. After the lecture ended and the other students filed out, Mia stayed in her seat, staring at her half-empty notebook. Then she made a decision. She gathered her things, walked to the front of the room, and introduced herself to Professor Donaldson. She explained, as clearly as she could, that she was an international student from Taiwan, that she was studying very hard, but that his accent was occasionally difficult for her to follow. She feared he might be offended. Instead, he smiled broadly and said, "Well, I'll tell you something. It takes real courage to study literature in a second language, let alone in Edinburgh. You should be proud." He offered to provide her with written lecture notes after each class, and encouraged her to come to his office hours whenever she needed extra guidance. The following week brought the International Student Orientation event, held in a large hall decorated with flags from dozens of countries. Round tables were arranged around the room, each one filled with students from different parts of the world. Mia arrived early and chose a seat near the edge of the room, uncertain and a little shy. It was not long before someone sat down beside her, a young man with dark curly hair and a warm grin. "I am Marco," he said, extending his hand. "From Bologna, Italy. You look like you are also wondering if the food will be edible." Mia laughed out loud for the first time since arriving in Scotland. Marco was funny, relaxed, and wonderfully easy to talk to. They discovered they shared many of the same anxieties about being far from home. Marco and Mia quickly became friends. After the orientation event, they decided to explore the city together, walking along the famous Royal Mile, the long historic street that stretches from Edinburgh Castle down to the Palace of Holyrood House. The street was lined with old stone shops, street performers, and tourists wrapped in tartan scarves. At one small restaurant near the middle of the mile, they made a joint decision that would turn out to be questionable. They ordered the traditional Scottish dish known as haggis, mostly out of curiosity. The dish arrived looking nothing like anything either of them had ever eaten. They both tried it politely. There was a pause. Then they looked at each other and burst into laughter. Neither of them enjoyed it, but they agreed it made for an excellent story to tell back home. As October arrived and the leaves on the campus trees turned from green to amber and rust, something shifted inside Mia. The days still felt challenging, and she still occasionally found herself struggling with accents, academic vocabulary, or the loneliness of a quiet Sunday afternoon. But she was no longer frightened by those moments. She had learned to sit with discomfort and let it pass. One evening, she bought a simple notebook from a campus shop and began writing. Not an essay, but a journal. She wrote about her bus ride from the airport, about Priya's tea, about Professor Donaldson's kindness, about haggis. Writing helped her see her own story clearly, and for the first time she began to feel not like a stranger in Edinburgh, but like someone who was slowly becoming part of it. Priya, who had joined the university's drama society, mentioned one evening that there was also a book club on campus that met every Thursday. Mia hesitated for only a moment before signing up. The group was small, 7 or 8 students, and met in a cozy back room at a cafe near the university called the Amber Kettle. The first book they were reading was a novel Mia had already studied in Taiwan, which gave her a welcome sense of confidence. She contributed to the discussion carefully, choosing her words with thought, and the other students listened with genuine interest. Walking back to the dormitory that evening, the Edinburgh streets glowing under yellow lamplight and a soft drizzle falling, Mia felt something she had not expected. She felt happy. By the end of her first full month in Edinburgh, Mia wrote a long entry in her journal. She wrote about what had surprised her most about studying abroad, and it was not what she had expected. She had worried about English. She had imagined struggling with grammar, with academic writing, with reading difficult texts in a foreign language. But language, she wrote, had not been her greatest challenge. The hardest thing had been something quieter and more personal. Learning to be comfortable with being alone. Learning to sit in a cafe without knowing anyone, to walk through a new city without a guide, to face uncertainty without immediately reaching for reassurance. In learning those things, she reflected, she had not just improved her English, she had grown. She reread the entry slowly, then looked out of her dormitory window at the Edinburgh skyline, the dark outline of the castle on the hill, the old rooftops, and the faint glow of the city lights disappearing into the mist. She thought about how afraid she had been on that first morning at the airport, dragging her heavy suitcases toward a bus she wasn't sure went to the right place. She thought about Priya's tea, about Marco's laughter on the Royal Mile, about Professor Donaldson's steady encouragement. None of those people had been there by accident. She had reached out, or they had reached toward her, and the result had been something real. Edinburgh, she thought, was no longer a foreign city. It was the city where her story was being written, one gray, beautiful, rainy day at a time. Mia's story, of course, was far from over. There were still difficult lectures ahead, still essays to write and deadlines to meet, still evenings when the cold and the dark made her long for the warmth of Taipei. But she faced those challenges differently now. She asked questions in class. She visited Professor Donaldson's office hours regularly. She and Priya had a standing Thursday evening arrangement at the Amber Kettle after book club, and Marco texted her funny observations about Scottish life almost every day. She had built something in Edinburgh, not just a study routine, but a small, meaningful life, and she understood now that this was exactly what studying abroad was supposed to do, not just teach you a language, but teach you who you are when the familiar world is taken away. If Mia had one piece of advice for any student considering studying in a foreign country, it would be this. Do not wait to feel ready, because that feeling may never arrive. On her first morning in Edinburgh, she had been cold, confused, and carrying more weight than she could comfortably manage, both in her suitcases and in her heart. But she had gotten on the bus anyway. She had walked into the lecture hall anyway. She had knocked on Professor Donaldson's door and introduced herself anyway. Each small act of courage had led to the next, until she looked back and found she had traveled, not just from Taipei to Edinburgh, but from the person she had been to the person she was slowly, steadily becoming. And that, she decided, was worth every rainy morning. Edinburgh had given Mia more than she had come looking for. She had come for an English literature degree, for academic experience, for something impressive to write on a future resume. What she found instead, or perhaps in addition, was a kind of inner resilience she hadn't known she possessed. She found it in the moments she had felt most uncertain and most alone, and she carried it with her into every lecture, every conversation, every Thursday evening at the Amber Kettle. As the first semester drew toward its end and the Edinburgh streets began to sparkle with early winter frost, Mia booked her flight home for Christmas with a full heart. She would miss this city, she realized. she would miss it because it had become, in the strangest and most unexpected way, a part of her. Question 1. Why did Mia have difficulty during Professor Donaldson's first lecture? Choose the correct answer. A. The classroom was too cold and she could not concentrate. B. She had not read the required materials before class. C. She found it hard to understand his strong Scottish accent. D. The lecture was given in a language other than English. Question 2. Fill in the blank. Mia met her first friend when she knocked on her dormitory door and invited her for tea. Question 3. Short answer. According to the passage, what did Mia say was the hardest part of studying abroad? Was it the language or something else? Explain in your own words. Question 4. Short answer. Describe 2 things Mia did by the end of her first month that showed she was becoming more confident and happy in Edinburgh. Question 5. Who did Mia meet at the International Student Orientation event? Choose the correct answer. A. Professor Donaldson. B. Marco. C. Priya. D. Her mother. Question 6. Fill in the blank. When Mia and Marco explored the Royal Mile together, they tried a traditional Scottish dish, which neither of them enjoyed. Question 7. Short answer. After Professor Donaldson's first lecture, Mia felt too embarrassed to ask questions in front of the class. What did she do instead to get help from the professor?